אבל מה קרה? Palestinian Health Ministry says casualties in Gaza have surpassed 8,700, with two-thirds of them women and children. Meanwhile, Israeli Foreign Ministry has put the country's death toll at over 1,400. Several explosions hit Gaza Strip as the conflict between Israel and Hamas enters its fourth week. Israeli troops and tanks are also seen positioning near Israel's border with Lebanon as fighting spreads. Now, for more on the situation, let's cross live to our correspondent Stephanie Fried in Tel Aviv. Stephanie, US President Joe Biden has rejected the international community's call for a ceasefire, but now he says he wants a humanitarian pause. How has Israel responded to this statement?
Well, that's right. And the rejection of the ceasefire is because the understanding is, as Israel has put it, and the U.S. has backed Israel, which is what happened, the mass killings, the savage killings carried out by Hamas inside of Israel on October 7th. That's not going to happen again as far as they're concerned here, and the U.S. administration is backing that. However, you're asking about the humanitarian pause. That's a call really to try and negotiate the hostages that are being held in Gaza for the most part, and that's from dozens of different countries, their nationalities spread across various countries, dozens different represented there. The hostage number has now been elevated to 242, and the reason that number continues to go up and up is because of intelligence and artificial intelligence gathering methods that are being used on this side to determine where the hostages are, who they are, who is a hostage, who is not, and as well as it goes to forensics here on the ground in terms of gathering remains of those who were murdered on October 7th here by Hamas. So that humanitarian pause would be an attempt at trying to negotiate a release of the hostages. Hamas has said that they'll release the internationals, not necessarily the young children, the babies, or the women or the senior citizens that are being held, but those who hold international or dual nationalities or international nationalities. So Israel will certainly comply with that if that's a demand or if it's a heavy suggestion, let's say, on the part of the U.S. administration. And that's because of the relationship and the technical matters surrounding that relationship, if the U.S. suggests that.
Well, Stephanie, let's go to the overall diplomatic front, with Jordan recalling its ambassador to Israel and another trip for U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken to Tel Aviv. Tell us more about all those activities.
Well, that's right. And Jordan's ambassador is being recalled as well. Jordan has said that the Israeli ambassador to Jordan, they're saying, don't come back to Jordan. The ambassador, she left, and they're saying, don't bother coming back right now. Now, that's being viewed as cosmetic and for public's sake, for the most part. Bear in mind, more than 50% of Jordan's population is Palestinian. Right now, the understanding, according to intelligence sources, is that the population, obviously, as we see in the protests, they're not happy about what's happening in Gaza, and that could destabilize Jordan. It could destabilize the kingdom, destabilize the government. They want that stability, so the Jordanian government needs to show that they are vehemently opposed to what's happening. But at the same time, bear in mind, numerous U.S. military bases are based in Jordan, trainings. There's joint cooperation between the militaries. Israel is a part of that, and that's been ongoing for decades. So that's something to take into consideration. Yes, Antony Blinken comes back for a third time since this war started. He'll be arriving on Friday. At the same time, we're waiting or expecting to hear a speech from Hezbollah leader, also on Friday, Hassan Nasrallah out of Lebanon. He's in hiding. He's going to break that. It's not that he'll come out, but there will be a recorded, he'll be recording and disseminating something that he has to say about the situation here. So waiting to hear what he has to say, because of course you mentioned the troop buildup. That's in response to aggression from Lebanon, and that's been a concern. Will Lebanon get involved in what's happening in this war? Will this fan out to a regional conflict?
Thank you very much. Our correspondent Stephanie Freed in Tel Aviv. Now let's go to our correspondent Noor Harazin in Gaza. Noor, some hospitals in Gaza have shut down, while others are still running on backup generators. What more can you tell us about the latest situation?
Well, right now I am inside the Shuhada Al-Aqsa Hospital, which is located in Deir al-Balah city, and this is the one and only hospital that is still operating in Middle Gaza. So actually this hospital is receiving people from different areas in Middle Gaza, like Deir al-Balah, Al-Nusayrat, Al-Maghazi, Al-Burayj camp, all in one hospital. What is happening around me is actually a number of ambulances coming from two different areas. One is really a strike hit a bakery around the Abu Sarar neighborhood in Al-Nusayrat, while hundreds of people were standing in a queue waiting their turn to buy bread. The other attack happened in Al-Burayj refugee camp, when the Israeli warplanes targeted a building that has an institution where people go there and fill water, because there is water tanks there. And also we're talking about hundreds of people that were in the area trying to get a turn to fill their barrels of water. We're witnessing tens of people that are arriving to this one only hospital, and this means that it is more than the capacity of this hospital. This hospital was made for only the residents of Deir al-Balah, but because of the continuous Israeli attacks and because of the lack of medicine and medical supplies in other hospitals, all the hospitals around the area of Middle Gaza stopped, and only the Shuhada Al-Aqsa hospital, where I am standing, is operating. Same thing is happening actually in Gaza and around the Gaza Strip. In Gaza, the only two main hospitals that are still operating are the Al-Quds Hospital in Tel al-Hawa neighborhood, and also Al-Shifa Hospital. And actually over the past two nights there were heavy Israeli shelling around these two hospitals, even though we're talking about hundreds of thousands of families that are taking shelter inside the hospitals. And this is actually the situation of hospitals here in Gaza.
Noor, with the Rafah border opening, has the trickle of aid had any noticeable effect on Gaza people where you are?
Well, the people here in Gaza feel like they are trapped. Egypt reopened the Rafah border to allow very little of a humanitarian aid to enter the Gaza Strip, and also allow a number, tens of those who were injured in Gaza, to leave to Egypt to get treatment there. And also hundreds of people who are foreigners or holding other nationalities than Palestinians, mostly from the US and Europe. All of these people managed to get out of Rafah border. However, we're talking about 2.3 million Palestinians that are still trapped in the Gaza Strip under the fire of the Israeli warplanes and Israeli tanks, and a continuous humanitarian crisis here in Gaza. The people did not feel any change regarding on the ground here. They did not feel any change on the ground regarding the aid that is coming from Egypt. The reason why is because this aid is very little comparing to the needs of the people of Gaza. We're talking about more than 1 million people that fled their homes and now sheltering and taking shelter in southern Gaza. We're talking about hundreds of people that are arriving to the hospital either injured or even killed. So the whole system here in Gaza, the whole humanitarian system is just collapsing here in the Gaza Strip, and actually things are going from bad to worse, even though there is aid coming in.
Thank you very much, and stay safe. Our correspondent Noor Harazin in Gaza. Egypt has reiterated that it will not accept any permanent refugees, despite opening its border to treat Palestinians in need of urgent medical care. Yasser Hakim reports from Al-Arash city near the Rafah crossing with Gaza.
Egypt is saying that Israel is trying to push the Palestinians out of their land in Gaza into Egypt, so that Egypt will be the new enclave instead of Gaza, and that Gaza would be then occupied by Israel. So this is Egypt's point of view. So Egypt is saying this is their homeland as Palestinians. They have to stay in their homeland, and Egypt will provide all the necessary care for them to stay in their homeland and not to be displaced. And that's the word that was used by the Egyptian president. And the only way to solve this issue, according to officials here, is for Israel to abide by international law and UN resolutions, which refer to a ceasefire and to cease from bombarding Palestinian civilians, and to accept a peace, a permanent peace based on two states, Palestinian and Israeli states, living in peace with East Jerusalem, the Palestinian capital, according to the 1967 borders. And this is according to the UN resolutions, not Egypt, not the Arab world, but this is what the international community has said, and the UN resolutions have falsified more than once.
Now, for more insight into the situation, we're joined in the studio by Professor John Gong. Professor, let's start with the cost of war. Of course, we just reported human cost, the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Now, let's go to Israel. It's reported that 10% of the country's workforce have been called up to duty, and a large part of the Israeli economy have ground to a halt. Can Israel bear this cost?
It's a huge cost to the Israeli economy. If you just look at the manpower, even from a university perspective, I was told like 50% of the student population in universities are now at the front line, and that's a very large number. Let alone people employed in different walks of life. Israel is noted for its innovation. Its economy has been built on huge infusion of venture capitals from Europe, from the United States, and I think all these infusion of capitals will be temporarily halted, if not forever gone. That we don't know. So that's a very large blow to the local economy. And the sad thing is that it doesn't look like it's going to stop. The war's not going to stop anytime soon. So it looks like this situation is going to last for a while.
So let's talk about the larger impact. What about commodity prices? For example, oil prices have been fluctuating in recent weeks. Do you think this will continue?
Yeah, what I've heard is that prices at grocery stores have definitely gone up, but not a whole lot, but it has gone up. The local currency, shekel, has depreciated significantly. Even though there's no shortages of groceries, there's no sort of panic buying at this point. But I think the strain on the economy is going to take a toll eventually. Israel is not a very large economy. It has a population of about 9 million people. With a shock like this, especially with a shock, essentially is a supply shock from economics point of view, with a shock like this that particularly going to last for some time, it's going to be very difficult for the economy.
Thank you very much, Professor John Gong there. Now time for world headlines.
University in Xi'an. He's a specialist in the Middle Eastern studies.
President Luis Arce met with the Palestinian ambassador to Bolivia, Mahmoud El Alwani, and took place around the same time. Bolivia's ambassador to the United Nations spoke in New York, asking for full recognition of the Palestinian state.
There is a great debt with the people of Palestine because we were not able to comply with what we established in the resolution of 1947 asking peace. As their actions press slowly, Israel has benefited from the resolution that gives them statehood and is now an occupying power.
Criticism of the Israeli government of Benjamin Netanyahu for the retaliatory bombing in Gaza, which have cost the lives of thousands of civilians, is widespread across Latin America. Colombia, Chile, and Jordan have recalled their ambassadors to Israel this week. Brazilian President Luis Inácio Lula da Silva has called out and condemned Hamas for carrying out its October the 7th attack on Israel, but also condemns Israel for what he says is a genocide now being carried out in Gaza. Back in 2009, Bolivia also cut ties with Israel and expelled its ambassador over another conflict between Israel and Hamas. And although relations were reestablished a decade later, the ties were never seen as particularly deep. Israel responded to Bolivia's latest action by accusing it of surrendering to terrorism. The disruption of diplomatic ties between Bolivia and Israel follows strong sentiments in the streets here, as pro-Palestinian groups have been protesting Israel's actions in Gaza since the start of the conflict. In La Paz, Monica Machicao, CGTN.
Who should live and who should die?
I want to discuss the conflict with Wang Jin, an associate professor and specialist in Middle Eastern Studies at Northwest University in Xi'an. Professor Wang, thank you for joining us. Now, Israel, as it puts it, says it's in phase 2. Where does the war go from here?
I think from the perspective of Israel hopes to launch the large ground offensive towards Gaza Strip. On the one hand, just as expressed from Benjamin Netanyahu and other Israeli leadership, on the one hand, to eliminate or destroy the very presence of Hamas in Gaza Strip, and on the other hand, to rescue as many hostages taken by Hamas as possible. But as we have to know that it will be the tough decision, and the process of the conflict will also be difficult. Because on the one hand, the ground military forces entered Gaza means very high possibilities of casualties of Israeli soldiers and Israeli officers, and this might lead to further political and social unrest inside at home. And on the other hand, the very ground forces offensive against the Gaza Strip might not safe for every hostages taken by Hamas and other militias in the Gaza Strip, and some of these hostages might be harmed and even might be killed in the future. So I think it will also lead to discussions as well as unrest at home of Israel. So but finally, but not the least, that a ground offensive into Gaza Strip will lead to larger waves of humanitarian crisis of local Palestinians there. That will become the disaster, very historic level disaster in the international history of refugee histories, and also will attract the attention of the whole world. So I think Israel maybe hope to ensure their own security, but with launching offensives against the Gaza Strip, I don't think it will achieve the goal that they declare, and I think it will lead to other rounds of the ground, very large waves of disasters in the future for both Israelis and Palestinians, I guess.
Now, Arab states members have called for an immediate ceasefire at the UN Security Council. Given your expertise, can you talk to us about the role of Arab countries and what they can do to mediate?
Sure, the Arab states, I think they can do a lot, because on the one hand, they have already under the multilateral mechanism called for peace and called for ceasefire between Israelis and the Gaza Strip. For example, they have the Arab League, they have the Islamic Cooperation Organization, and they have other regional and international multilateral platform that could help to express their attitudes towards the recent conflict between Israelis and the Palestinians. This is very important. And on the other hand, I think the Arab states, they could do something to offer help and assistance to the local Palestinians in Gaza Strip, because actually Egypt and other Arab states, they are the neighbors of the Palestinians, and they could open some channels for the international assistance, international goods to reach the hands of the local Palestinians in Gaza Strip. We're talking about the more than 2 million Palestinian refugees and Palestinian peoples in Gaza Strip who are highly needed of the international assistance right now. So the Arab states, they can do a lot of things. But I think the most important thing that the Arab states that they could do and they have to do is try to maintain restraint and try to maintain rational and express this attitude of rational and restraint to both Israelis and Palestinians to prevent the possible escalation of crisis in the future. So I think this is highly needed to do for Arab states as well as to the international society. Yes.
Netanyahu has reportedly lobbied the EU to pressure Egypt into accepting Gaza refugees, and that idea was rejected by Egypt. What is Israel's purpose here, and what are Cairo's concerns?
I think Israel the purpose is simple, that he hopes that okay, now if the Egypt open the border gate for Rafah, so then a lot of the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, especially from the northern Gaza Strip, they could enter Egypt Sinai Peninsula. So then leave the kind of the political and ground forces vacuum for the future military actions from Israeli side. So the Israeli might be able to act very freely in the future against the Hamas presence in northern Gaza. But from the perspective of Egypt and other Arab states, this sounds ridiculous because Egypt was not part of the conflict, and Egypt hopes to maintain their own social and political stabilities in this round of the conflict, and also hope to maintain the future rights of Palestinians to gain their own lands and to preserve their own rights over their own territories, especially in Gaza in the future. So I think this is a very conflicting idea, both from over Israelis as well as Egyptians. And but Egypt still can do a lot of things. Egypt will still continue to play the very great role and important role in helping and assisting Palestinians by opening and securing the humanitarian assistance channel towards Gaza Strip, as well as to help the local people there. So Egypt can do a lot of things, and also Egypt should not be alone, and the international society should do more to help the local people in Gaza Strip.
Professor Wang, thank you. It's always good to get your perspectives.
Has been accusing Israel of deliberately slowing down the flow of aid going into Gaza from the Rafah crossings, where I am currently. So far, since the war began on Gaza, the Egyptian authorities say that about 250 trucks have managed to cross from the Rafah passage into the Palestinian side. However, the State Information Service chairman says that there has been deliberate measures from Israel to slow down the search and frisking of every truck that enters Gaza, which has led to an extremely slow flow of the aid that is standing by here and has been for over 2 weeks. Hundreds more are standing by in Al Arish airport, where the aid has been coming from all countries across the world, waiting to find a way to enter the besieged Gaza Strip. Meanwhile, dozens of volunteers from across Egypt who are working with NGOs have been living here to load and offload trucks. Some from the Egyptian Red Crescent stand by in case of injured Palestinians come across the border to give them first healthcare services until they find their way to professional hospitalized services. A point that might not be clear is how the Rafah passage works. It is simply like any other land crossing. This gate does not directly lead into Gaza, but rather it leads to a buffer zone where trucks can enter, or civilians or passengers. And then from this buffer zone, there's another border where Israel controls. It checks all goods that go in, people, and everything. So opening the Rafah passage from the Egyptian side does not automatically guarantee or mean that all products, goods, trucks, and people will reach Gaza. There is another border that is controlled by the Israeli government. On Tuesday, 60 trucks managed to cross from Rafah into Gaza, and that's the biggest number yet since the crisis broke out. But it's far from being enough. In the usual circumstances, Palestinians usually get 500 trucks daily for their basic needs, and this is without having exceptional circumstances. With the current war, they definitely need much more.
The United Nations Security Council held an emergency meeting on Monday on the request of the United Arab Emirates, which sought a binding resolution demanding Israel accept a humanitarian pause to the fighting. And this follows a non-binding resolution passed by 120 member states at the UN General Assembly on October 27th, calling for an immediate ceasefire. Sally Patterson reports.
This was the 5th time Security Council members have met to discuss Gaza since the October 7th attacks against Israel led by Hamas, which saw Israeli and foreign nationals killed and taken hostage.
We will wear this star until you condemn the atrocities of Hamas and demand the immediate release of our hostages. We walk with a yellow star as a symbol of pride, a reminder that we swore to fight back, to defend ourselves. Never again is now.
UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has once again appealed for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire, together with the unconditional release of hostages and the delivery of humanitarian relief. The United States has refused to back calls for a ceasefire, saying this will benefit Hamas, as nearly 240 Israelis and foreign nationals, including children, remain captive in Gaza. Members warned the situation could escalate far beyond the borders of Israel and Gaza.
We have said time and time again, I repeat, there is no military solution to this conflict. We are yet to demonstrate there is a peaceful one. Prove us wrong. Every minute counts. Every minute is the difference between life and death for Palestinians in Gaza.
The effects of the violence on children was a central theme at the meeting, with more than 3,100 killed across Gaza, Israel and the West Bank.
Children in both Israel and the state of Palestine are experiencing terrible trauma, the consequences of which could last a lifetime. Studies have shown that violence and upheaval can induce toxic stress in children that interferes with their physical and cognitive development and causes mental health problems over both the short and the long terms.
UN critics question how much impact the divided Security Council can really have as the death toll in the Middle East continues to rise. Sally Patterson, CGTN, New York.
And now let's get some latest situation on the ground, and we are joined by our correspondent Yasser Hakim in Al-Arish city near Egypt's Rafah crossing with Gaza. Well, Yasser, we are talking about intensifying ground defensive in Gaza, and of course airstrikes are continuing, and so it seems that the humanitarian needs there are increasing. And we are also looking at the aid trucks. More of them are on their way to Gaza through the Egyptian side of the Rafah crossing. Bring us up to speed on that.
Well, the aid trucks and the humanitarian aid has been extremely slow in the last couple of weeks until now. There have been an average 10 to 15 trucks every day. The WHO says the Palestinians before would have needed 100 trucks a day. Now with the extensive and escalation of violence and attacks and the ground offensive on Israelis by Israel on the Palestinians, has led to an increase, the need of more than 200 trucks per day. Yesterday was maybe the highest number of trucks that have entered Gaza, around 60 trucks, and it took around 2 days. They were supposed to be entering a couple of days, but they had to go to Al-Auja border crossing Netens, and there to be searched. That's 100 kilometers away from Rafah, and then allowed in by Israel. So the aid is still trickling in, but it's not as quickly or as fast as or as much as what the Palestinians need, with the fuel running out, the medicine running out, the hospitals are in near collapse, and food and water nearly over for Palestinians. So it's badly needed, and the UN and Egypt and the international community is calling for it to increase as fast as possible. Back to you.
Yeah, it's far from meeting the basic demands of the residents there. In the meantime, Yasser, reports say one of Israel's ministry has drafted a wartime proposal to transfer some 2.3 million people in the Gaza Strip to Egypt's Sinai Peninsula. And Prime Minister Netanyahu's office has played down the report as only a concept paper. What do we know at this stage?
Yes, it's been categorically rejected by Egypt a few times, whether from the Egyptian president in several occasions, with meeting with leaders visiting Egypt, or during his summits in the last week. He had said that Egypt's Sinai is not going to be a place where Israel would displace the Palestinians into Sinai as a way to get rid of the Palestinians and take over the land again. The Egyptian president said this will end all Palestinian rights if they leave their land and go into Sinai, because he said if they go into Sinai, Israel will not allow them back to their homes. Egypt said that it will only help by providing the aid into Gaza, by also providing all military, all humanitarian support, giving medical equipment, giving medical support, medical teams to try to help out, but not allow Sinai to be the place where Israel will push the Palestinians into and take over, occupy the rest of Palestine, just like it did before in 48 and 67, and throughout the last few years as well, taking over parts of Palestinian land and turning it into settlements for Israel. At the same time today, as we speak, the Egyptian Prime Minister is in Arish and is going to Rafah, giving a message to the international community and to Israel that it remains an Egyptian land and it will not be allowed to be a haven for the Israel to get Palestinians out of their land in Gaza and the other Palestinian territories. So he's here. He gave two messages during his speech a while ago. First message is that he's here to develop Sinai, to develop Rafah, to develop the Arish city and all the northern Sinai area, to have more schools, more health, education, even tourism. I meant to do the live this time. Behind me is a coast. It's one of the most beautiful coasts, but it has been suffering because of the fallout from the violence, whether on the other side of the border, from the Rafah border, or terrorism in the last few years. But now he's saying we're rebuilding this area. It's not going to be an instability. It's going to be a developed area, an Egyptian developed area. And he also said, he confirmed again in his speech that Egypt will not allow Israel to continue on its plan to try to displace the Palestinians into Egyptian land, and that the Palestinians' home is Palestine itself. And the two-state solution should be the final solution. Those were the words by the Prime Minister a few minutes ago. Back to you.
More than 3 weeks into the Israel-Palestine conflict, Israel is expanding its ground operations in Gaza. Israeli airstrikes have leveled apartment buildings in the Jabalia refugee camp near Gaza City. Israel says the strikes destroyed a Hamas command center set up in civilian houses and a network of tunnels underneath. The Hamas-run Interior Ministry says at least 400 Palestinians were either killed or wounded in the strikes. The World Health Organization has warned of a public health catastrophe in Gaza. There's overcrowding in very few safe spaces, mass displacement, and intense damage to water and sanitation infrastructure. On Tuesday, the Palestinian Health Ministry said Israeli army fire killed 2 Palestinians in the occupied West Bank. More than 10,000 people have been killed since the start of the conflict. The death toll on the Palestinian side is over 8,500. On the Israeli side, around 1,400. Also on Tuesday, Yemen's Houthi militias issued a video statement claiming to have fired ballistic missiles and drones at Israel. Sat Manik with the Associated Press has more details from Jerusalem.
A barrage of airstrikes over Gaza, and it did hit the Jabalia refugee camp, which is on the outskirts of Gaza City. Israel said that it did kill a key Hamas commander as well as 50 other militants, and that the area was being used by Hamas for its activities. The Hamas has said that many people were killed. They didn't give an exact number yet, but they said that at least 6 airstrikes hit the refugee camp. Israel said that it is going to increase its operations, and there is concern that it has told people to go from the north to the south, but as it advances on the north-south highway in Gaza, there's concern that that access might soon be cut off. As the attacks continue, the humanitarian situation in Gaza is becoming more and more dire. There are hundreds of thousands of people, the UN says, sheltering in their schools as well as other facilities. The WHO, the World Health Organization, said that all 13 hospitals in northern Gaza have been given evacuation orders by Israel's military. However, the medics there say that they're not leaving. They say that if they move people, it would be like a death sentence. The Iranian-backed Houthi rebels in Yemen today released a video saying that they released drones and missiles targeting Israel, and they threatened to release more of them if Israel does not stop its aggression. Israel said that it did shoot down a drone over the southern city of Eilat. It also intercepted another missile over the Red Sea. But one of the biggest concerns Israelis say is that there's going to be another front with its northern border with Lebanon, where the Hezbollah militant group operates.
Now to Yasser Hakim in El Arish city near Egypt's Rafah crossing with Gaza. Yasser, foreign passport holders have begun crossing into Egypt from Gaza. Cairo has agreed to receive dozens of wounded Palestinians to provide medical treatment. Tell us more.
Yes, at the moment the dual nationals are waiting for the final document work so that they can enter. The first batch, we're told, it's between 400 to 500 from dual nationals, and they have been waiting for weeks on the Palestinian side of the Rafah border crossing so they can be allowed inside. There was also at the other side, today we saw ambulances from the Egyptian Rafah side crossing into the Palestinian side. We understand there were 40, we counted 40 ambulances, and they're planning to come back with around 80 to 81 injured Palestinians in critical condition. The process will be that they will be taken into the border first and determined each one, the condition of each injured or each casualty, Palestinian casualty, and according to his condition or her condition, they will be transferred to one of 2 or 3 hospitals in Al Arish. There is one called Sheikh Zuwaid. It's a small hospital in the middle of the desert that has made especially for this situation. It's an emergency center, medical center, with about 50 beds. And then there is the main hospital in Al Arish behind me at the end of this road. It's called Al Arish Hospital, and this is around 300 beds. And it can accommodate more critical conditions with surgeries that can be done. And if not, there is also the option to take some of the wounded, if need be, to Cairo, the government said, and they would also be taken there for treatment if the cases here are unable to cope with the condition itself. So what we expect today is around 80 to 81 Palestinians according to the Egyptian sources, and around 400 to 500 dual nationals also to cross the border into Egypt. Back to you.
Prime Minister Mustafa Madbouli visited the Rafah crossing in El Arish city yesterday. Sum up his visit for us.
Yes, he had this visit and made this symbolic speech in front of the Rafah border crossing to send different messages to different parties. One message to the Egyptians to say that Egypt is safe from the war. It's very well on alert, and the army is ready for any developments, and at the same time to send a message of sort of trying to calm the burden or the worries of some Christians of the spill out of this war into Egypt. The second message was to the international community, calling for a quick opening of the border to allow more aid to go into the Gaza Strip. He said that only over 200 trucks have entered the Gaza Strip since the war began, and this is very, very small number of trucks.
We lost contact. Thank you, Yasser Hakim. Yasser is reporting live in El Arish city near Egypt's Rafah crossing with Gaza.
The occupation and the fact that they have been targeting Hamas commanders are failing when you see that the Palestinians are still firing rockets toward Israel. And when you see the Palestinians fighting fiercely against the Israeli forces in the land of Gaza. And when you see and you understand or come to a conclusion, and I have been talking to different people and different sources who confirmed that Israel is trying to inflict as much pain and killing on the Palestinian population to make the Palestinians pay for the revenge that they think is justified, and they think it's their full legitimate right of defense while they are killing large number of Palestinian civilians.
Right, and Akram, it's also reported that Qatar mediated this agreement between Egypt, Israel, and Hamas to allow limited evacuations from Gaza. What do we know about these efforts so far?
I know that there were some comprehensive communication between Israel, Qatar, Hamas, and the Egyptians. Also, those communications are brokered and endorsed by the American administration. According to those, there were 3 different deals, one of which was the first one, due to which Hamas was releasing 2 Israeli women who were held captive in Gaza, and then another one was the release also of 2 other women who were also captured in Gaza. Now they were coordinating the leave and the departure of the people who have dual nationalities, and also the Palestinian injured people who are in a very critical condition and are needed to leave Gaza to seek further medical treatment. As a matter of fact, the number of people allowed outside of Gaza today is 80 people. 80 people out of 21,000 Palestinians. So you can imagine, do the calculation, and you will imagine how minimum the efforts are, but at least if you're saving one life, this is a very good thing. So Palestinians are moving now. Also, dual nationalities are allowed to leave Gaza. The first batch have just left Gaza to Egypt, and it looks like there is also some coordination underway to facilitate the departure of the other dual nationalities, and also, of course, other Palestinian injured people towards Egypt for the sake of accessing more advanced medical care that is missing in the Gaza Strip, due also to the Israeli ongoing bombardment, with around 13 hospitals in Gaza out of the surface because of the ongoing air, naval, and ground bombardment from the Israeli side towards Gaza. And I think I also heard another analogy that Hamas command is under Al-Shifa hospital. I saw the sketch that was drawn by the Israeli army. I questioned the integrity of that, and I can tell you, if Hamas was under Al-Shifa tunnel, then they would have moved very long time ago to seek safety. But it looks like everything now is being used, and Hamas is being used as a pretext to target the Gazans, to kill them, to devastate their life, and also to continue killing them the way the killing is going on now. And I'm quoting some of the different sources that I have been talking to for the past few days or so.
It's pretty difficult to look at those pictures, and even more difficult to try to imagine the human cost of the conflict there. Thank you so much, Akram Al-Sateri for bringing us all the latest details from central Gaza.
Here in Gaza have been calling on Egypt to reopen the Rafah border, not only to allow the humanitarian aid in, but also to allow those injured and specifically with critical conditions to leave the Gaza Strip. This has happened before during last wars on Gaza and escalations. Egypt kept the Rafah border open to allow those injuries to get treatment in Egypt, especially that the hospitals in Gaza, they are not capable of treating those injuries because of the lack of medicine and medical supplies, and because also the very little capacity in the hospitals of Gaza. And this is not the only thing. Actually, there is around 400 foreigners, Palestinians with double nationalities or foreigners holding American or European passports. They will be able to leave the Gaza Strip today, and this is according to sources, Egyptian sources. Until now, the Rafah border was not open. However, those people were asked by their embassies to head to the border, to the Rafah border today in order to leave and evacuate the Gaza Strip.
Thank you, Noor Harazin, live there in the Gaza Strip. Now let's bring in Stephanie Fried in Tel Aviv. Stephanie, an Israeli strike on Gaza's largest refugee camp killed at least 47 people on Tuesday. What more details can you tell us about this?
Well, it was more than a strike. That refugee camp was housing a command and control center of Hamas, a nerve center, and the nerve center that carried out the killings inside Israel on October 7. But beyond that, we're talking about commanders of the infrastructure, militant infrastructure inside the refugee camp, underneath the refugee camp. So what we know from the military is there was fierce fighting in that area overnight. Fierce fighting on the ground. These are ground troops, infantry versus Hamas. As well, they were being covered by air. It's important to take into consideration that a strike there, what happened, or what we're understanding is strikes on the Hamas infrastructure that had placed itself within civilian populations in a refugee camp. They also placed munitions stores, and they were underground in the tunnel systems there. When they were hit, there was a double explosion. It wasn't only hitting the tunnels or the Hamas command control centers and Hamas positions. It also, that created an explosion where the Hamas weapons stored underground also blew up, and that created a sinkhole because Hamas tunnels create a vacuum. There's a vacuum underground. Everything collapsed into those tunnel systems. So that's what you're looking at. That's part of what's happened here. Important to understand, these are vast tunnel systems that one could, in some places, ride a motorcycle through. This is where Hamas has, for 20 years, built up its stores of fuel, weapons, hideouts, and on and on. And their main command and control center is underneath Gaza's main hospital. So about the civilians, Israel, for weeks, not days, weeks, has been telling people, get out, go south. We are going to operate in that area because they knew that Hamas is there and that their main control centers and their commanders is there for various reasons. Hamas also has prevented, we understand, people from leaving, blocking its own civilians from going south. And the last thing that is being reminded here and over and over again, the numbers, the figures, those are coming out of Hamas-controlled Gaza, and that should be taken into consideration when we look at the tolls and the figures and the numbers and the talk of what's happening there.
Several media are reporting that Bolivia has cut diplomatic ties with Israel. Chile and Colombia have also recalled their ambassadors to Israel over the mounting humanitarian crisis. How is Israel responding?
Well, that's right, and I did just read that Bolivia did say that they're going to cut ties. You know, if you look in the bigger political picture, it's all about alliances. It's where the alliances fall, which countries are allied with Israel, which countries are making their determinations. Now, if they'll stick with or ally with Israel, if a broader, and it looks more increasingly with Houthis, Iranian-backed Houthis from Yemen firing missiles on Israel now, it looks increasingly like we're getting into more of a regional and possibly beyond hostility or war. So that would be expected, that certain embassies would pull out, certain governments would pull out. At the same time, 2 days from now, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is due to come back for the third time since this started. And the understanding here is that there's going to be a further pledge from the U.S. of weapons, of support. At the same time, the U.S. administration is stressing the need for humanitarian aid. We understand that there are ships that are being organized from various European countries to come over. Also, dozens of humanitarian trucks going through the Rafah crossing, organized to get through the Rafah crossing to get into Gaza. So it's going to go both ways in terms of Israel and the support for Israel. There is support from the UK, support from the US, support from other European countries. At the same time, some South American countries are pulling back, and that's to be expected. I will also point out a new development that we're seeing this morning, that Egypt, around that Rafah crossing where the humanitarian aid is going through, they've placed tanks, according to reports I'm getting, outside that crossing. The understanding there is if there's an uptick in what's happening regionally and in the Gaza area, but as well, Egypt has repeatedly said they will not accept Palestinians if they break through from Gaza and try to escape into Egypt.
Thank you, Stephanie Freed, live in Tel Aviv.